Welcome back. This is Dan from DS Design Woodworking. In the last video, I put together this ShopFox W1668 drill press, assembly and testing, and now it's time to get on to the design of the cart for it. I've already researched and come up with ideas, looked for other people's ideas to incorporate and come up with a plan. But what I didn't have was the drill press itself to verify dimensions. So now that I've got it assembled, I can finalize things and get back to AutoCAD and finalize the design of it. What I wanted to take into account was with the sanding option on this one, there might be times when I spend a little longer time working at this besides just drilling holes. Plus drilling holes from up here isn't comfortable and I don't want to sand up here. So if I built a normal countertop height stand, this would be much too tall for any kind of extended use. So I want to make sure this is at a comfortable height. No good. I want to be probably here is a nice working height. And when sanding, the table is going to be in this position. Despite all the range of adjustment, this is where it needs to sit so that the spindle, the oscillation gets into the table for dust collection. So sitting right now at 54, and I want to be roughly here. I'm going to drop that to, we'll make it 47. That's the height I want. And now between the base here, we've got 18 and a half. So I want 47. Take away 18 and a half. 30, 29 and a half. I think it's straight 28 and a half. That's where I want this to sit, at 28 and a half inches off the floor. So that's my first consideration. Now right now I'm sitting at just about 36, so I'm going to drop it down about 6.5 inches, a little over, and I can kind of verify that my thinking is straight. That's a decent working height. I'm actually going to make it 28. That seems a little high. So I'm going to shoot for this sitting at 28 inches. Now for the width of it, here's one thing where I ran into a couple of builds that I didn't like the narrowness of it. One in particular had a lot of views, really nice build, nice channel, but it was a 16-inch wide, and there's issues with that, I think, for stability when you've got something this heavy and this high off the ground. So I'm going to go a lot wider on mine, and I'm going to show you exactly why. Just to roughly demonstrate, when we build it, we're going to have a 3/4 inch side, and typically a caster won't sit out underneath your side piece. It's going to be in a little bit. And if you're dealing with swivel casters, tape shortened up. If you're starting in 3/4 inches, and where it actually contacts the ground is only here, so we're losing about 2 inches per side is the actual contact patch that's on the floor. So if you had 4 swivel casters on there, when you're running sideways and starting at a narrow width, you've lost 2 inches here. Now you're on a really narrow base and tippy. So if you're going to move it around at any amount, I think it should definitely consider building it wider. So I'm thinking for stability, I want at least 17 inches or so on the casters to get well outside the weight distribution. And that would bring me to a 20-inch width. And I think because I have the space, I'm going to go a little wider to get drawer space. I'm going to use 22 inches as my outside dimension. For the width, 22 wide. And for depth, we've got the head to consider. 24 is a nice round dimension for the box itself. And then I'll have an edge that comes out a little bit. And for the top I want to put on it, I have no reason to want to look at this. I won't be bolting anything down to it. It's ugly for the rest of my shop. And so I'm going to make a cart that has a shelf for this to sit on, and then a finished top that's going to sit above it. And I'll cut a hole in it for just this collar to come through. So I'm going to have a nice clean top and just a collar sticking through, and I'll bolt this underneath so that it's hidden. And get roughly the height of this. I want 2 3/4 inches in between spacing. I'm going to round that to 3 just to make sure that I don't run into trouble with the bolt head. cabinets hitting. One other thing quick that I wanted to show that's going to affect the design. I picked up a piece of birch plywood that I'm going to use, and because of the variations in the grain, and I like it, I'm going to tip it horizontally versus normally on the sides of a cabinet I would have the grain on the plywood running vertically. And I'm going to build it so that the grain wraps around all three sides and flows. And so to do that, the sides are going to be mitered 45 in the front, and then the drawer fronts will also be mitered to fit right back in there. So for our drill press cabinet, I came up with a width of 22 that I want to use. And I'm going to just build from the bottom up here. I went out and measured the casters are 2.5 inches, so we're going to be off the floor by that. I also said I want my drill press base to sit at 28, so that's going to sit on it, and that I wanted to put 3 inches in between, and each of these is going to be 3/4 inch plywood. And once I put some sides on it, I've already got kind of a cabinet perimeter established. We'll do the same for the 3/4 plywood here. Trim it so it looks right. The sides are going to run past the base. The sides will be continuous at this shelf, and then the top's going to sit on the sides. So that gives me the bare basics here. I went and took some measurements off the drill press and drew a little profile of it so I could be certain of some things as I put it in here. And one thing that catches my eye is I wanted this collar to sit above the table. And right now, after I remeasured things, it looks like I'm flush. So I'm going to drop this just a little bit. Instead of just having the column coming out, I want to see this collar here. I think it'll look nicer. And that's a 3.5 inch size, very close to 3.5, that I can use a 3.5 inch hole saw and have a nice tight fit there. I've got 130 pounds of drill press sitting here, and if the weight was all coming down the middle, this plywood would definitely bow over time. But with a rigid cast iron base, the weight's distributed on the sides, so we're going to be fine as far as this plywood. Plus it's going to be bolted together in a couple of spots, held together. I do have a problem though with the sides. I'm not going to sit this much weight on glue and biscuits or any other fasteners here. So for this one, instead of just a shell for the cabinet, I'm going to put another layer of plywood inside for that shelf to sit on. Make sure it's going to adequately bear the weight. I missed a line there. Okay. Now this entire weight's going to bear down the inside here, and also when I put the casters on, typically I wouldn't put them out under the side. So if the caster were here, the weight would have been trying to shear the side off of whatever fasteners or glue or biscuits I had in here. If the weight were coming down, it would be trying to tear that off the side. Now instead, the weight's coming down on top of the base, which will then be sitting right on top of the casters. I drew a little side profile of, not exact but close enough, of my swivel caster, just because I want to demonstrate something here. It doesn't matter otherwise. So this is the basic carcass that I'm going to have, and once I get that front profile, I'm going to take it over here for a side profile. And I decided I wanted to be 24 deep. And I also drew a side profile because I wanted to make sure, such an odd shape to the drill press with the head that sticks way back. I wanted to make sure what I was getting there. I mentioned out in the shop that I'm thinking I'm going to run the grain horizontally and wrap it right across the drawer fronts and out the other side. And that means that when I miter the sides here, they're going to be at a 45 going back in, that I'm going to lose 3/4 inches, and the drawer fronts and the false front up top will sit back to here. I don't want to have this drill press quite out tight there, so I'm just going to move it back 1/4. And one thing I wanted to check was that I had measured correctly up in the air. I didn't want the drill press to hit the wall first. I want the cart to hit the wall. And I can see that I didn't measure quite good enough
think I measured the back of the motor, and the back of the motor actually has another little housing on it that sticks out further. That gives this, there's no reason to draw any more detail than that, I just need the overall profile of it. I'm going to put an edging around the whole thing, 3/4 inches, and I'm going to have it stick up 1/4 inch. And just to put it in there quick, I think I'll make it about 1 1/4 inches tall. See when I get this in here that I'm basically even now. I don't want to be quite that tight. I want to make sure the drill press isn't hitting the wall. So I'm just going to add 1/2 inch. So I didn't grab that entire line. Sometimes trying to do things a little too quickly. Now I know I'm clear on the back of the head. So I can push this tight to the wall. And this edging being around the back will also means that if I push it up against the wall, that the baseboard will clear down here. So it can sit nice and tight. And this edging will be on all 4 sides, and it'll be raised up for a lip for round drill bits and things to not roll off, which is, I don't remember who to attribute it to, but one of the other builds I looked at did that, and that was a very nice little idea to add for this type of cabinet. Since I've got to take the drill press apart to get it in here, I could just set the thing on top of a cabinet. But as I mentioned out in the shop, I have no reason to want to look at that ugly base. It's not going to benefit me at all to have it there. I might lose a little bit of vertical drilling height when the table drops all the way down, but I don't think so, because the table can only drop to the bottom of the rack anyway. It doesn't drop all the way down to the base. And so it's going to have little effect on the vertical capacity on my drill press. I do have to think about how I'm going to get this in here though. Once I get a hole drilled 3.5 inches here, I'm going to have this structure, inner structure out. I need to take the head off the drill press and the collar, which then the rack will come off the side, and I'm going to slide them up through the hole. And then once I have that up in there, I can bring this plywood in. Actually, I think I can have these sides glued on. Now just have this one loose. And once I get this pushed up in there, I can slide this piece in, use pocket screws to hold it. I'm not going to glue it because if I ever need to take this out for warranty or something, I want to be able to reverse that and remove this piece and slide it back out. So that solves the problem of how do I get this thing in here and be enclosed in here. I should have plenty of strength with the plywood. I considered putting a vertical here, not having my drawers as deep, and putting like basically an inset back under where the main weight comes down. But with this structure here, and the fact that this plywood is going to be bolted through here, there's not going to be really any ability for this plywood to bend. So we should be good on strength. Once I get here, I can look at my false front is going to be up here. Actually, I won't need any of this. The top's going to hang over. This will be a false front. And I already looked at it a little bit, so I'm thinking that I'm going to have one big drawer and 3 small drawers. 15 3/4, so if I split that 3 ways, I get 3 equal drawers here and one bigger one on the bottom. And then if I wrap this plywood around, I'm just gonna use the saw curve as what's gonna end up being the spacing between the drawer fronts. And that should give it a really neat look with a continuous grain around it. I want to show one thing here too, what I was stressing on the width of this cabinet. And why I think it's important to make it wider. One build I looked at that was only 16 inches wide. Nicely made, nicely designed. I can move my casters are a block with a reference point. Apparently that's somewhere else, so they didn't get picked there. But I don't think the weight and the height were considered for safety, and so I can demonstrate it real easily here with the narrower build. And that one was also, forgot to move it up first, a much taller setup. Basically like up at regular cabinet height. And again, I've got a block and I didn't capture reference point. So when you've got this tall skinny cabinet and you're rolling it on these casters, here, let's look at this first. What's actually hitting the ground here is much narrower than your cabinet. So when you're rolling sideways, you've always got debris on the shop floor. And this setup here, you can see that if you're rolling sideways and hit something, it doesn't take much. And picture that being a 70-pound head up there or whatever it weighs. It doesn't take much to be in a situation where you might be tippy. With a wider cabinet and being lower, you could hit something going sideways and you've still got a long ways to go before you get to the point where you're going to overbalance and have a problem or a dangerous condition. So just want to make sure that people take that into consideration when you're designing your own. Do whatever you want, but this is why I found that to be such a concern when I watched the other video. That's too heavy of an item to ever have headed for the floor and at somebody, or maybe you react and try to catch it and just hurt yourself. So from here I can figure out my drawer sizes. I'll figure out the drawer boxes, and the ease of doing that when you have a CAD, I got a 1/2 inch for glides, 1/2 inch material for the sides of the boxes, and I can go from there. And I'm not going to take time to do it all sitting here, but I'll get it done, then I'll come back and look at the finished dimension plan. I'm going to jump back in here because I've got what I need to lay the thing out. I've got my fronts, got my drawer boxes. Front and back will be 17 by 4, 6 3/4 on the same width. Drawer sides are 17 3/4. I did decide to put a back inset here, not for strength as I originally considered doing that, but to help keep it square. If I'm going to wrap the screen around the front, this box is going to have to be perfectly square in order for things to meet up on the sides. And versus just putting like a 1/4 inch back on, having this 3/4 inch plywood set further in is going to add a lot of rigidity and help to keep the thing square. And I'm going to leave this as a void in the back, and I think I'll put some kind of pegs or hanger or something on here, and I'll make use of that space. One of the advantages of drawing things in a CAD program, I've got all but one of my pieces of plywood that I need out of this sheet. I was just short of getting the way green I wanted to get it here, so I did go and take a 1/4 inch out of the depth, still clear of the head, and that gave me an extra, that comes out twice, that gave me an extra 1/2 inch here to make sure I can get the top with the green I want. And then I got everything but the bottom, and I'll just grab another piece of 3/4 inch plywood and get that. So I'll get this a few things printed out, make some notes on these piece sizes, and be ready to start cutting. So with the way that I laid out the plywood, I didn't have a clean rip all the way through, so I needed to carefully lay out how far I could go on the first pass here, and to make sure I stop. And then I'm going to just put a cross cut in there in a dead space so that I can come back and connect the two and maximize my sheet this way. And it's just a matter of breaking down these two halves. That would be the right side, and the drawer fronts on the left side, and the top. And then we're going to get the two uprights and the shelf and the inset back out of the second piece. And then I just wanted to show what it can do for you to carefully lay out a sheet like that. It's a pretty good use of material. And with all those pieces cut, I went to add the miters to the side pieces in the front. and then broke down an old piece of plywood I had laying there for the bottom. I went through each piece that was going to need pocket holes just to get them all done in one setup operation. And then set about taking apart the drill press I had just put back together. I need to get some careful measurements to make sure that things are going to line up properly. And then I found out that I didn't have a 3.5 inch hole saw, so I decided to give it a shot with the big Forstner bit I had recently bought. After this thing caught a couple times and jumped and dinged my plywood, I needed to look for a different method, so I decided to try another thing that's normally in a drill press and set up a circle cutter to get the right diameter, which worked, but not great. Then it ended up making a hole though, without me going to the store, so I'll take it. With the hole cut, I got a test fit, and then also used the base installed there to mark where a couple bolt holes were going to be, and then I could transfer them to the shelf from there and get that pre-drilled to hopefully line up exactly where I want those bolts to be. Then on to assembly as I get the bottom and the sides. And on to assembly, just standard pocket holes and glue. With all the pocket holes, of course, going to be hidden away either on the bottom or on the inside. The two uprights I can glue in here, and you can see the pocket holes that are set up for the shelf. If you remember, I took a 1/4 inch out of this height here when I was designing it, and it turned out to be pretty tight, so I need to get it laid down there to get the plywood wiggled in. And with the back piece installed, I'm going to just check the fit on the front, and then move on to getting some drawer boxes made. I had all this lumber sitting around for other projects, so I was able to just break it down for drawer boxes. And add a groove to the plywood to all the sides. This plywood for the front got ripped into the false front on the top. 3 matching 3 5 1/8 inch drawer fronts, and then the remainder on the bottom. I'm going to use 2 swivel casters on the front and 2 fixed casters on the rear, which gives nice maneuverability. And then finally I got to assemble the drill press, see what it's going to look like. And some finishing touches with the drawer pulls. And I finally got around to actually bolting it to the plywood shelf. A little silicone on the wrench helped me stick the nut to it and the washer on the bottom so that I could slide into that narrow space and get the bolt started.
That wraps up the project. Everything's together and ready to go to work. I knew that I would have a little bit of trouble with the miters wrapping the grain around like this. And not all the corners are as tight as I would have liked them, but it was something for my shop. I would obviously not build it like this if I were building it for someone with all this exposed plywood edge and things. But it was interesting to try. It was just inspired by the sheet of plywood that I like the grain so much on it. I'm a little disappointed that the darker part of the grain didn't pop out a little more. I thought I'd get a little more contrast with just clear lacquer on it. So not quite the look that I was picturing, but turned out pretty nice. And I've got tons of space now to get everything that I've got in some other drawers, upper cabinets, all over into here, everything drilling related. A little bit of trouble with the miters doing it this way, partly because the support layer of plywood I recessed back here to make sure it wouldn't interfere with the drawer closing. When I mounted the glides back there, the glides don't get back far enough to get into the rubber stops at the back that hold it shut. There should be a decent amount of pull to get that started, and they're just sitting without contacting that. So with a little bit of adjustment, when I feel like taking it back apart, I can maybe get this to pull back a little bit harder, maybe do just a little bit of work to get this to close up, but it won't affect the function. It's extremely stable, no worries about that. Around the back, I ended up with a little bit of ugliness on the sides. I have the uprights showing. I couldn't quite get this piece out of my one sheet of plywood if I had it wide enough to cover the uprights. That's how I originally tried to make it work. So this would have been a full back piece. Trying to make the best use of that one sheet of plywood. I couldn't quite get it, so I ended up setting it inside the uprights. It faces the wall, so it's not gonna make any difference. Just not the way I would design or build something if it were for someone else. Use an old scuzzy sheet of plywood for the bottom. I got everything but the bottom out of my one piece that I purchased. Hopefully this video will help someone in their own design. Feel free to ask any questions or make comments. If having the design portion of it was helpful, then leave a comment so I know that, and I'll try to include that in future videos when it makes sense. If that just made it longer and didn't really help, then that would be helpful to know that also. So more projects are coming soon, some more epoxy pours, and also some wine bottle holders. Hopefully both some barn beam ones that I'm pouring epoxy to fill the cracks, and then a CNC project for that also. So if you want to see future content, go ahead and add yourself to the channel and get notified when those come up. Until then, my last challenge here is to figure out what to do to make use of this space, and otherwise I'm going to put this thing to use. Thanks for watching.